If you're a pagan, then, you are ordinarily prepared for an acknowledgement of the truth of Christianity. Why? Because under 4a, we'll see that Newman thinks that your relative sense, your sense of the way the world is, your judgments as to prior probability, your understanding of how things work, that will already have been prepared, as it is for most people, to assent to the truth that there is a God, and that God has a certain will, and that that will can be to some degree understood and responded to. You already think all that. Therefore, you will be prepared for your judgments as to prior probability or axiomatic commitments will prepare you for the reasonability of the particularly Christian, or even more particularly Catholic, claims. There are special issues about the people of Israel that we won't go into. However, 4b, there's a subset of pagans who are not so prepared. They have undergone a process of formation such that their relative sense is actively in tension with the truth of Christianity. And Newman likes to call the religion that they have the religion of civilization, or the civilized religion. And he's speaking here especially to the culture despisers of Christianity from the second half of the 19th century in England, but what he says is directly and even in more precise ways applicable to the culture despisers of Christianity today. Their religion, he says, is one in which any real sense of God has been expunged. Insofar as they use the term God, they use it rather for and about themselves. Their religion is fundamentally centered upon their own needs and desires, and to a secondary and derived extent upon the needs and desires of a particular group. He has in mind the English, so he thinks that the Church of England is really about the English, at least in considerable part. Preparation of that sort is deformation. One is deformed by preparation of that sort, but one is deformed in such a way that one will simply not be able to recognize the truths of Christianity as being true. One's relative sense will not function in a way that makes them accessible to one. And it's one of the great strengths, I think, of chapters 9 and 10 of the Grammar, that Newman is really the first to make distinctions of this sort, to show descriptively how it is that it is possible that something might obtain which no Thomist would expect, which is that there are large numbers of people, maybe now a majority, who simply can't recognize that Christianity is true. On ordinary Thomist grounds, that's surprising. For Newman, it's not in the least surprising. And he, to that degree, is a prophet for us, I think. We'll skip now to 4c, 1, 2, 3, 4. What he does in the 10th chapter of the Grammar, at some considerable length, is to lay out what he calls the evidences of Christianity. Historical evidences, evidences from miracle, and the like. And ordinarily, when that is done, when the evidences of Christianity are deployed, it is with an apologetical view. That is to say, whoever's doing it expects those who are not already convinced of the truth of Christianity to respond to these evidences, prophetic prediction, miracle, the sheer existence of the church, all that kind of thing. People who lay out the evidences expect people to respond to those evidences by saying, oh yeah, I see now, I get it, it must be right. Baptize me. Newman lays out the evidences precisely in a frame of reference that does not expect that outcome. Look at the quotation in 4c4, the very last one. Christianity is addressed, both as regards its evidences and its contents, to minds which are in the normal condition of human nature, as believing in God and in a future judgment. But most minds now, think 1870, that's when he's putting the final touches on this book, most minds now are not in a normal condition. Most minds now have an relative sense which does not work as it should. Most minds now then precisely will not be such as to recognize the truth of Christianity, even though, of course, Christianity is true. So I'll refer you over to the second quotation under the heading on page 1. I won't read it, but it's a peculiarly elegant and very precise distinction between truths in the order of being, that is to say, what's actually the case, on the one hand, and truths in the order of knowing, which is to say what you might expect people to assent to on the other. The distinction is beautifully drawn in that quotation, and it's a fundamentally important distinction. Let me conclude then. The contribution of Newman in this book, there are many, but this is the central one, I think. The contribution of Newman in this book is that he writes as a thoroughly modern philosopher. By modern, I mean an inheritor of the philosophic tradition that essentially begins in 17th century Europe. For him, it's mediated largely through English speakers. That is to say, he's read his Locke and his Hume. Though he's read Descartes, he doesn't actually discuss him much. So he's much more familiar with the English versions of this, but the tradition is the same. It's a tradition that turns traditional Catholic thinking on its head. About what? Well, about the question of prima philosophia, or first philosophy. For traditional Catholic thinking, first philosophy is a philosophy of being. It's what we would now call a metaphysic. It's a set of claims about what there is and what it's like. For the tradition of modern European philosophy beginning in the 17th century, prima philosophia, first philosophy, is epistemology. The first questions in philosophy must be questions about knowing for modern philosophy. Newman writes within that context. He understands that logic perfectly. He too writes this whole book, and many sermons and much else, about epistemology. But he does so in such a way as to show that epistemology cannot be first philosophy. He engages the epistemologists, let's call them that, on their own ground and demonstrates the incoherence of their position, while not expecting them to be convinced. That's the clever part. Because not expecting them to be convinced is precisely what Newman's own position yields. And of course he's right, they're not convinced. And this is, again, a central lesson that we have to learn from Newman. When we engage in apologetical argument for the truth of Catholic Christianity, we ought not expect the pagans to be convinced. And usually they're not, so we'll be right. That doesn't mean, however, that we should not engage in such argument. It simply means that we do so under a properly nuanced, fully accurate, and precise set of distinctions. Those distinctions, Newman is the first Catholic thinker in modernity to provide. And I rather suspect, though of course I don't know, that Pope Benedict's Augustinian formation and what appears to be his particular respect for Newman is in large part about this. Benedict understands this beautifully. It's been rare among previous popes to understand it. Thank you.